I'd like to, we're passionate about this, so I was going to jump right in, but I wanted to say thank you to Kelly for joining me today, because while I do have this background, personal and training in trauma, and I do work with trauma survivors, and I'm a yoga teacher, Kelly, she's also, like you said, a yoga teacher, but she brings the therapist perspective. And we recently partnered on a project. So I thought, I'm sure you have other modalities, other practitioners that are joining us today, in addition to yoga teachers. So thanks, Kelly, for I'm Joe's guest and you're my guest. So
yeah,
we're all coming
I'm
together.
Thankful as well to you and to Joe and to everyone at Be Yogi for having me be able to join in this. Like you said, a big part of my interest is how the mind and body, integrate and connect, both from a yoga perspective, but a psychotherapy perspective. So I'm really honored to be able to offer that and do this with you, Simona.
And before we jump into our conversation, because I really want this to be a conversation. So thank you for mentioning, for those of you who have joined us live, if you have questions, please send us, and we'll do our best to answer as they come in, because we want this to be a conversation, not for you to be talked at. So I wanted to offer, I don't know about you, but when I join webinars and we spend a lot of time, especially this year, we spend a lot of time in front of the computer, sometimes we transition from other things. Maybe there are other things happening, going on in our minds. So I wanted to offer a short seated practice to experience some of the elements that we're going to be talking about in this webinar, as well as to come together as one and practice choice, practice being present. So if you'd like to join me, you don't need anything. I see somebody saying, yay, seated practice, yay. Thank you. So if you'd like to join me, you don't need any props where you are. I'm sure it's exactly where you need to be. So take some time and maybe find a seat that works for you. Maybe you're choosing to be sitting in a chair, or if you are sitting on the floor, or perhaps if you've been sitting a lot today and you'd like to practice standing, feel free to find that form that works for you. And then if you'd like to close your eyes or lower your gaze, know that you can always practice with your eyes open. And then if you'd like to maybe notice where you're making contact with the seat, with the chair, with the floor, wherever you may be. So noticing those points of contact. And then if you'd like to invite some movement, perhaps shifting over to one side and the other. And then if you'd like to maybe lean forward a little bit, bringing your shoulder blades closer together. Maybe leaning back and rounding your back. And then if you'd like to add breath, if that's in your practice or you'd like to experiment with adding breath, feel free to inhale as you lean forward. That's one possibility. Maybe exhale as you round your back. Feel free to move with your own breath and your own pace. And then in your own time, maybe coming back to center. If you'd like, another way to invite movement might be to bring your hands together. And then perhaps if you want to extend, so reach your arms out. And then maybe bringing your hands back together in front of your heart. If you want to add breath as well to this movement, perhaps inhaling as you're reaching, as you're extending your arms, and then exhaling as you bring your hands together. Maybe noticing as you're doing this, what it might feel like to take up a little bit more space around you. And then feel free to either stay with this movement or come back to center. And then one other movement that I would like to offer before we conclude this short practice is maybe you're reaching up. So lifting your arms up, maybe you're reaching for something imaginary, and then bringing your arms down. So moving up and down, lifting your arms and bringing them down. Again, adding breath if that's in your practice or you'd like to experiment with that. And then pausing next time you reach up, maybe pausing and then choose whichever side you want, and then maybe turn to that side. So a bit of a twist. If you're sitting in a chair, maybe you're resting your hand on the back of the chair. And then in your own time, shift over to the other side. And feel free when you're ready to come back to center. And if there's any movement that you feel like you would like to do and I haven't offered, maybe take 10 seconds or so as we transition back to our conversation to do that movement if you would like. So thank you, Joe, for allowing us to or inviting this practice. And thank you, Susan. I see. I said I wasn't good at talking and looking at the chat, but somehow the computer does that for me, so I can see some of the comments popping up. So thank you. And if you're okay, Joe, I can go on.
Please do. I think that was a great way to start. I feel much more relaxed. Thank you.
Well, I wanted to offer this one. Like I said, we're gonna probably reference this practice a little bit later, knowing that we have the time. So this is kind of what trauma sensitive yoga looks like. Some of the stuff that I do with my clients. So I wanted to offer this as an experience, and then we'll reference this practice later as we talk about the elements, trauma sensitive elements. So before, Kelly, if you'd like, and Joe, if you're okay with this, to kind of, trying to be mindful of the time to kind of go into our conversation. Maybe Kelly and I wanted to offer a little bit of information before we get to the actual elements of a trauma sensitive practice, to understand where we're coming from in terms of when we say trauma. There's so many definitions or understanding of what trauma is. So we wanted to explain a little bit about that and where we're coming from in this conversation, as it relates not only to the elements of a trauma sensitive practice, but as well as to the recovery process and how trauma plays into it. So Kelly, if you'd like to start with that.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Simona. So when we talk about trauma, like Simona said, it's important to have an understanding of at least where Simona and I are coming from, with this work. And trauma is a very big topic. It's a huge concept and very relevant for so many of us. When we're talking about trauma, we are referring to this idea of something that happens that's too much too soon, that's too much for too long, or maybe not enough for too long. What does that mean? Well, we can look at this from one perspective of something that happens to somebody. This is often called the single incident type of trauma. Maybe there is an accident. Maybe there is a devastating loss. Perhaps there's a natural disaster that occurs. There's an event that happens, and then there is an effect from that event. And the event that occurs overwhelms the individual and their capacity to cope and their capacity to integrate this experience. When we look at something from that perspective in a diagnostic kind of viewpoint, so something that I might work with in terms of diagnosing trauma in somebody, the only definition or the only diagnosis that exists in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, is PTSD. And post-traumatic stress disorder has several criteria that have to be met in order to be able to be diagnosed, and carries with it 4 distinct symptom categories that have to be met to some degree in order to be diagnosed as PTSD. What we are talking about a little bit more here in our work together is PTSD, yes, but also what the DSM doesn't quite capture or touch on is what happens when this trauma goes on for several years or throughout the entire development of a child's life, is chronic in nature, is bringing in a very important element with the way we are viewing trauma here. There's an interpersonal and relational aspect to this trauma. This becomes something a little bit less narrow in terms of diagnosing or even, understanding a picture of than a PTSD diagnosis. And it's something that we're working with in our work together with the name of complex trauma. So there's certainly impact from single incident trauma. This is not to simplify that or dismiss that at all, right? You could probably back me up on that, not to put words in your mouth either, Simona, but that's in and of itself a really significant event. But we are also including the chronic nature, the complex nature, the relational, interpersonal aspect of what we are using as the term, and we didn't invent this term, but is out there in the field of complex trauma.
Right, and I thank you for saying that it's not that single incident trauma is not trauma. That's not what we're saying. What we and what plays into the elements that we're going to be talking about and how what we wanted to share, how to make our practice, your practice, trauma sensitive, is this interpersonal aspect, this relational aspect that happens when we're dealing with complex trauma, when we're dealing with cases of abuse, neglect, and so on. So like Kelly said, something that happens, it's not only the event and the experience, which are very obviously significant, as well as the effects of trauma, but it's somebody, usually a caregiver, somebody that you trusted. So, and trust and safety are very closely related, and that plays into the recovery process. And that's why we wanted to make sure that it's clear for everybody that we're talking about complex trauma and that this relational aspect comes into play. So just because as like we can talk about this for hours, and I try to be mindful of time, so every so often I look at the time. Maybe Kelly, what I wanted to mention here is how when we're dealing with trauma of any kind, right, and we want to take that step towards healing or recovery, we, especially from our perspective as practitioners, or the part of it that relates to us as practitioners, is the safety. That's the first step that happens in the recovery process, is establishing safety. So sometimes that means removing the source of trauma. Sometimes it means finding support for the trauma survivor. But the part that applies to us and what we wanted to offer and discuss in today's webinar is that keeping in mind the relational aspect of complex trauma, when somebody walks into our office, into our practice, and they're ready to take that step towards the recovery process, unless we establish safety, there's no recovery. And go ahead, Kelly. I see that you wanted to say something.
You finish your thought.
I was going to transition to the elements of,
Yeah.
of practice.
I think that, Simona, I just want to draw out two really important components of what you're saying that are important to recognize in the context of understanding trauma and crucial to include in our understanding of recovery. And that's power or empowerment and relationship. And a trauma survivor has been stripped of their power. Someone who has experienced trauma has been stripped of their power, and there's no way to heal if they don't get that back, if they're not empowered. And in establishing safety, whether it be, like Simona said, removing the source of the trauma, connecting them with supports, or rebuilding trust in a therapeutic relationship, that begins to give power back to the survivor. And that happens in the context of a relationship. So you'll hear throughout a lot of what we're going to be talking about in these elements, those two components are interwoven through all of this work, is empowerment and relationship.
Yeah. And I'm seeing some of the questions coming in. So it's not that we don't see them. I wanted to, we're halfway through and we haven't talked about the elements. So I wanted to also mention some of them, and then we'll pause and answer. So when we're talking about, one other thing that I wanted to mention, when we talk about establishing safety, it's not enough to tell somebody this is a safe space or you are safe. Saying something and that does not mean that we're establishing safety. So that's why that trust piece comes into play. And it's through the elements that we're about to cover that we build the practice of those elements. We build that trust, and then safety, and then recovery. So you see the transition or the connection. And especially when we're talking about trauma survivors, and somebody, like Kelly said, somebody that is a survivor of complex trauma, so something that, like we said, that has happened over and over and over again, over a longer period of time, they get to a point where two things happen. One, they don't feel like they have a choice. Choice is not even an option, whether they have been told that you don't have a choice, there's nothing you can do about this. I mean, how many times, and I know I was guilty of that before I started doing this work, you would hear about an event or something that had happened, and I was thinking, like, how come this person didn't just walk out? How come they didn't do something about it? And they didn't do something about it because they've heard over and over and over again, there's nothing you can do about it. You basically, the message is you have no choice. So choice is not even on their radar. So that's one thing that happens. And it's one of the elements of a trauma-sensitive practice. Practicing choice in our practice. See what I did there? But practicing choice is an element. Maybe in the short seated practice that we did, the movement that I offered, maybe you've heard one option is this, another option is this, if you'd like. So we're trying to, by offering choice, we're not only, it's like the muscle, right? We're going to the gym to get fit or whatever, practice, and it's the same with choice. So we have to start somewhere, and we offer choice, and by offering it over and over and over again, and maybe at first it can be overwhelming, which this is something that happens with trauma survivors. They've gotten so used to other people making decisions for them that when they're faced with making a decision, something that to some of us might be, well, it's as simple as, is it A or B? that can be overwhelming. So that's one thing that we maybe keep in mind as we work with trauma survivors or as we look at our own practice. Choice is an element in the recovery process, but it can also be overwhelming. Go ahead, Kelly.
Well, I was just going to piggyback on that in referencing the seated practice that Simona led. If there's too many choices, or even if there's an A or B, sometimes that being overwhelming. Sort of the other side of that is always having the permission to opt out and to not do. And I think the way that Simona, the language, which is another element that we can transition to, Simona offered something and demonstrated it, but it was a, maybe you want to, perhaps you would, this might be interesting, you know, words that were invitational in that way, that gave the choice to follow the example or to not, to have the option to say no.
Right.
But
And oh, go ahead.
That language, though, is the way that we use our words conveys choice, and it conveys in the choice, it conveys empowerment, and conveys a sense of being in charge of our own bodies, all things that are needed to establish safety in a trauma survivor's work. The language is invitational. This is one element of the language that we use in offering choice.
Right. And I think that you're going to hear us talk about these elements and sort of, we're talking about choice, and choice doesn't happen without language, right? And so on. So it's not that they're not silos. Right. They're all elements of it's like, I'm not too good at baking because I get too creative. But so I can't follow apparently directions, but you know, it's like the ingredients in a recipe, they can be by themselves. Maybe they have, you know, they taste in a certain way or whatever, but together they make up that, you know, great dish or whatever you're doing. I don't know if that was a good.
That makes sense. That makes sense to me. I mean, we're weaving in and out of these different elements, and it's not that you know, I did the element of choice today. Now I don't have to, and that's set, and we're done. And we're constantly going to be in our conversation and in our awareness as practitioners, aware of these various ingredients, these various elements that come together to form the trauma sensitive focus and practice.
So I wanted to mention that because for somebody that is, you know, we all learn in different ways and process information in different ways. And for somebody that may be expecting, well, element number one is this, and element number one is this. And then why do you keep, I thought you were talking about choice, and it's because one has to, you know, they all work together, and it's just like the recovery process. It does not happen in isolation. We can't just say, now we've established safety, let's move on to, because you might be coming back to that part. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that, so I mentioned how with trauma survivors, the element of choice can be overwhelming, and it's something that needs to be practiced because they have not had that opportunity. The other thing that happens as a result of complex trauma is many trauma survivors are hypervigilant, which means that they live in a constant state of fight or flight. So it's like having the engine on the whole time. You know what happens, or you're walking around always looking over your shoulder. So sometimes, or not sometimes, more than sometimes, when a trauma survivor walks into our practice, there are subtle details that they might notice that we or someone else might not notice. So when we talk about a trauma sensitive practice, we're also talking about the environment. So from everything from where maybe we start with where our practice is located. Maybe when they walk in, it's the art on the wall. Maybe it's the language. Again, we're coming back to language, right? And we haven't even started addressing that, but you see how it keeps coming up. The language that you're using in your intake form. It's, you know, whether you have plants or how the seats are set up.
Are you playing music in your space? You know,
yep.
Yeah. Literally
That's
everything
right.
and anything a client comes into, or a survivor or a practitioner comes into contact with, is the environment. And that might sound, I mean, to cut you off, Simona, but I was just thinking about like how that could potentially sound like, well, how do I know what's the right thing to do then? If it could, everything could be, you know, interpreted one way or the other. That's the whole point of, we are making our efforts to help whomever we are working with feel safe, not tell them that this is the way, that this feels safe and that doesn't feel safe, and here you are safe, and you know, I'm telling you that you're safe. But we are doing our best to set up our space and our environment to allow for the feeling of safety. And we can't know what every person is walking in with, but we can do our best to try to create those conditions. And the environment is one element. There are several others in which we try to do that too.
Right. And thanks for saying that, because it's true. Maybe you're hearing this and you're going, whoa, that is a lot. I mean, what are you trying to say, that I need to revamp my whole space and so on, especially in today's environment, right? And we're not saying that. This conversation is to be aware of certain things. And then maybe today you're taking this information in, maybe tomorrow, you know, there's some time to process it. Maybe tomorrow you start looking at the aspects of your practice. There's no, you know, one of the things when I went through my training, one of the things that my supervisor said, and I was like, what? I was kind of taken aback, but she said, it's not a question of if you're going to trigger someone, it's a question of when. And when I heard that, I was like, what do you mean? And I felt this, you know, like I have to be perfect or whatever the story was in my head. And that's not what we're talking about. The question, what we're saying is be aware. And there's only so much that you can do, in the sense that we are not experts. There's no it's not possible to know. There are too many things going on in my head that are trying to come out. It's impossible to know what somebody's thinking, what their experience may have been, what are those subtle things that may trigger them. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I just wanted to put it out there. So we're sharing some of these elements, and it's, you know, you might sit with it and you might say, this does not apply to me, or, oh, that was interesting.
Mm-hmm. There's a question that came in, Simona, that I'm just reading that might actually be helpful in drawing us to talk a little more about language from Mary.
Sure.
More conversational than directional, so students can ask questions in the class. Maybe we could talk a little bit about language and how like being instructional versus conversational, or instructional versus sharing in the power, right? There's that word again with our the people that we're working with. I think that if you're an instructor, say there's, you know, maybe this assumption that, oh, this is the instructor, this is the teacher, and I'm, you know, the student. And that right there is a power dynamic that we want to try to level out. Now, of course, as the instructor, you're you know, the person offering the space and offering these teachings or opportunities to make choice. But the way that we communicate that can be more conversational, more power sharing versus more directional and hierarchical. And when we're working in a trauma sensitive way, we want to use language that's the latter, that's more power sharing. So it could be as simple as expressing or offering a chance to be curious about what you're feeling, or perhaps you would like to move in this way. We want to not give, we don't want to dictate, basically, is what I think I'm getting at there.
And that's why and thank you for, Kelly, first, thanks for noticing that, and Mary for asking that question. Language is one of my favorite topics, and I can go on and on. What we're talking about is invitational language. So maybe if you joined, you were here at the beginning and you heard me say, I don't think I said it's an offering or an invitation. I don't think I specifically used those words, but it's maybe you'd like to try this. So I'm not telling you how many times, and I know we're yoga teachers and so on, but we go, and I've had that experience going to a class where we feel like we're looking at somebody next to us and, oh, they're looking a certain way. So maybe I need to kind of force myself to look that way. We all have different bodies. Kelly and I are both yoga teachers, but I don't look anything like what she looks like when she does certain forms. So the point is to not dictate, it's not this top-down approach. Even if you have, well, let's finish that thought. The point is to invite. And that's when we practice choice, because when we say do this, then a couple of things happen. I'm deciding for you what to do, that you are going to do this. There's no room for you to check in with your body, with yourself, because I'm not even, through my language, I'm not giving you that option, right? So we're talking about invitational language. Yes.
Yeah, well, just to before we move on to the next piece about that, and I think, Mary, to your question about asking questions, and Simona, I'd love, for you to give your input on this too, if I'm missing any of it from your perspective. But I think that there should be, we want to allow that safety to be able to ask questions, but we don't want to get into a dynamic where someone's asking a question and you are holding the answer and you
Right.
are holding the correct answer, because really from a trauma sensitive focus, we want to help people look within and feel within and understand from within what feels like it's right for them. This might be different than another perspective of teaching yoga. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. That's when we build, I was going to say, that's when we build agency, right?
Yes.
Again, we're going back to not having choice, not being, as a trauma survivor, being used to people making decisions for you. Mm-hmm. So now we're building, as we go through this recovery process, through invitational language, through choice, we're building that sense of agency and empowerment, which is really important in the recovery process. And what you just said, Kelly, goes back to another element of a trauma-sensitive practice, which is a shared experience. When we go to an expert, even the fact, and maybe some of you have noticed that in my title, it is trauma-sensitive yoga facilitator. And Dave Emerson and his team, they were very intentional about that, because they didn't want it to be a teacher, an instructor. So maybe even sitting with those two words and hearing teacher, instructor, to me, it sounds like somebody up here that I don't know anything. I'm coming to you to share this knowledge, right? It comes from up here. And there's a time and a place for that, because with Kelly and I had a conversation and I was like, well, if I need a surgery, I'm obviously not going to go with the baking metaphor to a baker, right? There's a time and a place for that. Like, I don't know anything about surgery. I'm not going to do it myself. Let's see, does this hurt, right? I'm not going to do that. But when we talk about the recovery process in a trauma sensitive environment, teacher, instructor, those words, which we kind of take for granted, right? Because that's what we are, yoga instructors, we are yoga teachers. I still don't know. I may know more about the topic. I know nothing about what it feels like to be in your body. So facilitator, to Mary's question about asking questions, right? Facilitator is more of there's a shared experience. It's not me providing an experience for you. There's a shared experience, and it's about collaboration. So I can share what I know about my topic, whether you're a therapist or, whatever work you might be doing, you may know more about it, you can share, but then we want to empower our clients to decide for themselves what it might be best for them. I told you guys that we can talk about this for hours.
There's so much, I know.
Yeah, I just wanted, because I wanted to, it looks like maybe we have 3 more minutes or so before we're taking questions. And I know that there's some questions there that we haven't even addressed. The other 2 aspects, and I'll mention them quickly, or elements that we wanted to address is non-coercion, which plays into this shared experience, the power differential that Kelly mentioned. So it's not about forcing somebody. So maybe I already kind of made that clear, but I wanted to mention non-coercion. So we're not telling somebody what to do. We're not forcing. And maybe you're hearing this and you're like, well, I don't have that intention to coerce somebody into anything. But sometimes we do it when we don't even realize, because we're so used to, and hey, I'm guilty of that as well. We want to encourage our clients, and sometimes we say, hey, great job. And that, or like, oh, just how many times you've been to a class and you've heard, well, you know, if your legs start shaking, just, you know, stay with it. Or I had a friend who went to a breathwork workshop, and she was getting overwhelmed with the experience, and the facilitator, whoever was leading this, said, well, just stay with it. You're on the brink of release. Well, how do I know that? Right? So at that point, what may have been more helpful for for my friend would have been, hey, these are some choices. So let her make that decision. So sometimes we do those things and we mean well. Nobody, right, has bad intentions. And then the other thing is interoception, which is, again, if you've done the practice with us at the beginning, is about being present. You can't make choices for yourself if you're not checking in with yourself. What is helpful for me right now? What is accessible? Like I said, as a yoga teacher, because that's the name, right? That's the title. I can't do certain postures. Even the fact that maybe you notice that I'm saying postures, I'm saying forms, I'm not saying pose. Mm-hmm. Think about that, going back to language, the impact of language, what pose may mean, right? So maybe sit with that, because again, we could talk for hours. So
I just want to say, can I just say real quick about interoception? I mean, this is such a big topic. There's so much that it's such a biggie. I get really excited about it. But interoception, for so many trauma survivors, there's a disconnection from our bodies, from knowing we even have a body or what our body feels like in any moment. And these inquiries into what we're feeling, what we're impulse we have to move in one way or another, the choice to do that, all helps to facilitate knowing and feeling what we're experiencing in the present moment, that for so many trauma survivors is not available. And so we work with this practice and several, what we're talking about it from a yoga perspective right now, to help facilitate interoception, to know that we have a body and to know that we're feeling in our bodies in the present moment. That's enormous. So there's a question a little while back about yin yoga and feeling things. We want to help survivors feel their bodies. We could go on probably for another 45 minutes on that one little aspect, but that interoception piece is so crucial to healing, about coming into the present moment and feeling and knowing that we're feeling in our bodies. Right. Big piece of healing.
Yeah. And I see that some of the comments that, some of you work with veterans, and one other piece to keep in mind and why interoception is so important. So knowing, feeling, even sitting with what is, you can't do that, right? We can't be present without practicing and connecting to our body. And when you're a survivor of complex trauma, very often the only way to cope with with the experience is to dissociate, which means that you're outside. It's like an out of body experience, right? So you can't feel anything. So when you're doing that over and over and over again, you're not able to. I've had clients when I've done the practice, similar practice like what we've done when we started, and they're not aware that they're lifting their arms because they've been dissociating for so long. So could we pause maybe here just because of the time? And I see, and maybe Kelly, you're gonna have the floor. So it says there's a question, what if us therapists have PTSD? And maybe this ties into Carrie's question. So we received a question from Carrie. I don't know if she joined today live, but she emailed a question about how can we, as practitioners who have experienced trauma ourselves, how can we be present and how can we help our clients, and wanting to share some of that experience so they understand that we can relate, but then sort of keeping it professional. So I think they're related, but I'll let you answer the PTSD and therapist part.
Okay. Yeah, I do think those questions are related. I think to the first question about what if a therapist has PTSD, I mean, first of all, we all come to the table with our own stuff. And so I don't want to have any sort of indication here that I'm suggesting that therapists don't also have stuff that they have to work out and that they're struggling with at times. So if that's the case, something that's really important for us to do as therapists before we show up with our own clients or concurrently on our own, though, is to seek that is support and that help for ourselves, and to take care of our own stuff and do our own work, really, so that we can heal. But if we want to help others heal, we have to work through and look at and continue to look at and heal, our own stuff, or do our own work in that way. So I want to say that if you're a therapist with PTSD, you are not alone. And B, that doing your own work is really important to be able to do this work with others. I might transition a little over into Carrie's question is, well, what do I do with my own stuff if it feels relevant to somebody else's work? Or how do I use what I've experienced to help somebody else? And oftentimes knowing your experience and having processed and worked through your experience positions you to be able to empathize in a way with somebody that is experiencing something similar, allows you to really bear witness to what this person is working through in a way that, had you no awareness of this or not had worked through this on your own, you wouldn't be able to do. I think there are times where acknowledging that with a survivor that you're working with can be helpful, in the sense of, I understand this, or I've experienced something similar myself, but there's a line there where we want to remember that this is about them and their healing and not ours. And so one guiding question that I always use in my own work, whether or not to share whatever might be resonating with me personally, is, who is this about? Is my sharing going to help facilitate the healing for this other individual? Or is this more about me having resonated with their material? And so using that to help decipher and distinguish, when it might or might not be appropriate to share, can be very helpful. I hope I semi-answered both of those.
Yeah. I wanted to make 2 points, and I know transference is another topic, but it can happen. Sometimes our clients may say something that trigger our own experience, our own trauma, right? So what do we do when that happens? But again, interoception, right? We have to be aware, we have to be present, we have to understand, hey, this is my own, she or he triggers me, my own stuff. This is separate from her. Or them. That was one thing. And then of course I forgot the other thing, but yeah, that's what happens. But I'm looking
at questions do we have?
Yeah, well, Sarah, she says she has complex PTSD, and so Sarah, so she's basically doing her work and helping people. Oh, that was it. Thank you, Sarah. And now I remember what I was gonna say. The wounded healer. So if you've heard that before, right? A lot of us that come to this work and do this work have had our own experiences or our own, and you know, my case, I will mention Joe read my bio, and this is what led me to yoga. So having PTSD, this is what led me to yoga, and then led me to trauma sensitive yoga. I remember sitting one night, going to bed and thinking, do they use yoga for trauma? I knew nothing about that. And then my whole world changed. So yes, Sarah, I hear you, and you are doing the work, which is what we were saying, doing the work and being able to, and it's a practice. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that trauma does not go away. It doesn't mean we do the work, but it doesn't mean that we're never going to be triggered. It's part of our life, just like any other experience. The difference is that when we do the work, we have the tools, we have the skills to notice when we're triggered and know how to respond to it, which is what we're trying to do with our clients. So Kimberly is asking if I'm associated with trauma sensitive healing or trauma sensitive yoga. Both, but I'll explain why. Trauma sensitive healing is my own practice, my own website. Trauma sensitive yoga is the website for the training program that I went through, and I am listed there as a facilitator. So that's my connection there.
I think, Simona, the next couple of questions we addressed in our talk. There's a question from Jenny. Go ahead.
Yes, that one I saw. Go ahead.
Yep. Which Simona and I, she went like that because we've had several conversations between the two of us about this very topic, teaching virtually or facilitating virtually. So the question is, what kind of considerations do you make for cultivating a safe environment when teaching via a virtual platform such as this one?
Which is what we're both doing this right now. I'm working with veterans with PTSD and with all of my clients, so trauma survivors, exclusively online right now, and Kelly's seeing patients. So maybe we can address maybe the two of
I'll just quickly say from my perspective, I mean I'm leading a couple of yoga classes a week virtually, but the majority of my time virtual work is spent with clients like this, basically on the equivalent of a telehealth equivalent of a Zoom call. And for me, it's very important to be in a private space where nobody else in my home is hearing. I always have the headphones on so that nothing that anyone is saying can be heard by anybody else in my space. I often encourage my clients to be in a space where they feel they can have the privacy that they would like to have and feel comfortable, they're safe enough having to be able to share what it is they want to share. Obviously, that's a lot different, and there are a lot of variables that can go into that that are not necessarily at play when you're meeting in the same office space as someone. But those are two ways that I do that. And I don't know, Simona, maybe you want to share from the facilitating end a couple things.
Yeah, from my perspective, so I worked the preference, which is obviously not always possible, is to have had already a relationship with your client, right? So it's an existing client, is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. So then you know a little bit more about them when it's new. And I've had that situation because, it's 2020, so we adapt. But I do an intake. I spent about, it depends, sometimes 30 minutes to an hour, an intake process with them where I ask about where they're practicing, if they're home or somewhere else, if they have a private space. I do during the practice, the session, I actually give them the option to have their camera on or off. there's, it depends on your own experience and level of comfort. This is why I'm saying that it helps to work with existing clients. But in terms of, I think it's a conversation. I think it boils down to this. It's a conversation, and think about what is it that you can do. Like if you're somebody that is, well, in Kelly's case, I guess it's hard to have a session with somebody and for them to not have their camera on. For me, it's different, right? Because it's a shared experience. And I don't do anything when I do yoga. I don't do inversions. I don't do anything that could possibly hurt them. So again, we can go on and on, but maybe we've answered, gave you enough information there for.
I do want to be mindful of our time, and there was a question that asked us, and it's somewhere in there to list the elements. Can we just take a second and because we did weed through. So here are the elements that we covered today, or we touched on today: language, environment, choice making, non-coercion, shared experience, and interoception. So there were 6 that we wove in and out of today in our conversation. Someone earlier had asked if we could just kind of sum them up, the list.
And I know you mentioned the yin class, but there was something else in that question that I was gonna, so Vanessa's saying, I ask students to bring their awareness to one area where they're feeling the most sensation, physical sensation. You can leave it, and I'll try to be brief. You can leave it at sensation. So maybe you've heard me, and I said, perhaps you might notice some sensation in the back of your neck, or whatever you're addressing, and then leave it at that. The other option is to say, and it may or may not be present. I do this all the time because, again, every day is different. Our bodies feel different every day, but also, especially for those who have been dissociating or are dissociating, the sensations might not be present. So hopefully that's, Vanessa, hopefully we answered your question. Mary, I see you say, I don't know for you, but try. That's right. I actually had a client who said to me, well, tell me what to do, which happens very often. Tell me what to do. Is this form the right form? And I said, well, how, basically, you tell me, like, how does this feel in your body? Because I can move them in a certain way. And we haven't even addressed hands-on adjustments, but we can move them in a certain way, but it doesn't mean that that's helpful. You can actually cause more injury than not by, I thought you were going to say something. So Darcy, did we answer your question with the list of elements? So let us know if not.
Just mention here real quick in terms of those elements, a couple of folks have asked if we could type those out or say them slower. And what we'll do is the post webinar communication, we'll make sure that those are typed out and listed for everybody. So everybody will receive an email with this, with some answers to questions, including those list of elements.
How about we can, Kelly and I can put together a handout that you can send out tomorrow to everybody, which is something that I should have listened to my intuition and done it earlier, but I was like, we'll talk about it. So Joe wanted to be mindful of everybody's time. Me, I could go on and on and on. And there's so much to cover, right? So tell us if we still have time or if you would like to.
We can, if you're okay with it, we can take another 4 minutes here. And then, again, whatever we can't wrap up today, even if we don't get to all the questions, we'll send these questions to you, Simona, and you, Kelly, after this, so you can answer them, so that we can get those answers out in the post-webinar communication. But we have about 4 more minutes if you're okay with that.
It's good with me.
Okay, so I've heard the phrase "teach from your scars, not your wounds" many times. I've actually never heard that, but that doesn't mean anything. I'm a sample of one. Could this be similar to shared experience? So thanks for asking that. Maybe we clarify a little bit. When we say shared experiences, a lot of times when we go to a class and I'll just speak for yoga, because I've experienced that too. I go to that teacher, right? And there's in some ways pressure to provide an experience. So as a participant, a lot of times you feel like you have to do what that teacher is showing you. So there's no option for doing other things. I mean, for those of you who have been taking yoga classes or any kind of, other classes where you're following what somebody is doing, I don't think that you felt comfortable kind of going off on your own. And if somebody was doing, maybe Warrior One, and you were like, oh, I'm just going to do a handstand, right? So that's what we do. We want to be part of the group, and so we follow what they're doing. So in that regard, it's more of a guided or like somebody providing an experience. When we talk about shared experience, is when I lead a trauma-sensitive yoga class, that practice is my time or my opportunity to be present. Well, I have to be present, otherwise I can't do that, right? And to practice choice for myself as much as for my client. And it's not for my client to do what I'm showing. Maybe you've heard me say, I'm moving at my own pace as I was rounding and shifting. But you decide for yourself. You might go faster, you might go slower, you might opt to do, and Kelly said that earlier, you might opt out. So that's what we're talking about when we say a shared experience.
I think also, and this is maybe more from the psychotherapeutic perspective, is that healing is can't happen in isolation. I think, Simona, you said that earlier. Right. And the healing process is very much dependent on a relationship, a healthy therapeutic relationship. And in that way, there's a shared experience in bearing witness to and being present with the healing of a survivor that the therapist does. That's the relationship, that's the shared experience in their recovery. So they're not alone. They are not in isolation in this healing.
And I have to say thank you to Adam. He's so quick. He shared the elements. So for those of you, if we spoke so quickly, and I said I promised that I put together a handout. We're talking about language, so invitational language. We're talking about practicing choice, so giving options. We're talking about non-coercion, so not forcing somebody. And we haven't necessarily covered ahimsa, like no harm, do no harm, and how it actually applies to ourselves as practitioners, and the things that we tell ourselves, and the way we show up. That's, we haven't gone to that. So non-coercion is the third one. And shared experience, which we discussed earlier, interoception, which is being present. And some of the details that Adam shared, so those bullet points were more talking points that we shared with Joe and Adam in terms of to know what we're going to cover. So if it doesn't make sense, the handout will clear everything. Okay, Jenny, yes, you're getting a handout. How do you approach meditation? Oh my goodness, you guys, I could talk about this. Megan, how do we approach meditation and trauma-sensitive yoga? The same elements. And I wanted to say this. I know we've talked about therapy, we've talked about yoga, but the same elements apply to massage. The same elements apply to a fitness practice. The same exact elements: encouraging choice, invitational language. With meditation, I actually do teach meditation as well. To practice with clients with PTSD, and it's giving them choice. So we think that meditation is about sitting cross-legged, maybe humming, not moving for whatever, 20, 30 minutes. Meditation is mindfulness, is about being present, which goes back to one of the elements, interoception, right? So it's about being present. So I offer choices when we do meditation. If it's something that is for 10 minutes or so, it's usually guided. So I don't just leave them in silence, because the mind works. right? It's guided. They have the choice to move. A lot of times I do moving meditation because I'm one of those people that can't sit still. Remember PTSD. So, so those are, again, the environment. Everything that we talked about applies to meditation. And I know that we have just a little bit of time to address that. Okay. My gosh, you guys, I would love to answer
So
all
many
the
great
questions right now,
I
but
know.
right now, I guess we will, is there further qualification we can achieve to offer more specifically trauma-sensitive classes for liability's sake? Huh. Wow, that has that aspect. I can't really address liability necessarily. Joe came back on.
Here he is.
Joe, was that the magic word that we said? Well, qualifications, I think I'll just say, if you feel called to do that, maybe I'll phrase it. If you're worried about liability, these elements, I think, that we shared, and I don't want to speak for Joe or anybody in the insurance industry, these elements actually, all of those things help to not hurt people, actually. But I would probably phrase it, if you want to get this, or reframe it, if you want to get more education or qualification or whatever, are you doing it for liability or doing it for yourself? So I can't answer that question.
Well, this has been great, and I just wanted to pop back in to wrap things up. And I do want to let everybody know any questions that we didn't have a chance to get through. We'll comb through all of these questions and make sure these questions get sent over to Kelly and Simona so that they can put their expertise into those questions, and we'll get it back out to you guys in the next few days. I want to super thank you, Simona and Kelly. I think today's topic was extremely informative and very, very important. And just a really nice kind of change from a couple of these webinars that we've done. And I know there's been a lot of information that I've taken in very personally today. And I just really appreciate you guys sharing your expertise for me and in the B-Yogi community. I know we're all richer for it, and just really appreciate everything here.
Thank you for having us.
And yeah, we appreciate that. And thank you for all the questions. Thank you, Joe, for having us and inviting us and to talk. And this is a passion of ours. So we can sit here for 10 hours and talk about it.
Excellent. Well, maybe we'll have to do another one of these. And of course, everybody, you can certainly find Simona at traumasensitivehealing.com. And again, we will send out any additional information, reference points, or links for you guys that you can find out and connect with Simona and Kelly after this event. Thank you all very much for attending. Really appreciate it. And Simona and Kelly, if you have anything else to say, please feel free. But really, again, just want to thank you guys for this. What a great session.
Thank you all. Very grateful to have been here.
Yeah, we appreciate it. And I think you said you're going to send out, I saw some questions if people want to learn more. I mean, with Kelly and I would be happy to talk more and join in the future if there's an opportunity for that. We also, she and I collaborated recently on a passion project, as you can probably tell. And we put together an online course, which addresses exactly that, how to make your practice trauma sensitive. And we've got 6 modules, about 40 videos that we go into details about every element that we covered. So if you're interested, I think Adam has a link or he'll send it out or something. And since you are, for those of you who are B-Yogi members, or actually for the participants live today, we have a special offer and you get 20% off for those of you who were able to join us today. So thank you, Joe.
Of course, yes. And everybody, please take advantage of what Simona and Kelly are offering here. Yeah, thank you all. We'll see you guys all in a couple of weeks. Thank you, Simona. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you. Bye. Wow.
A great one.